Alright, so here goes. I never thought I'd be that guy, posting my whole life on the internet looking for strangers to tell me what to do. But here I am. Back in 2009, I packed up everything I owned, shoved it into my half-broken-down Honda, and moved to the city. I was 22, fresh out of college, and ready to build something for myself. I didn't have much, just a job offer that barely covered rent, and the kind of determination that makes you think you can take on the world. Trusting people? Yeah, not my strong suit. My dad cheated on my mom for years, and she just took it. She never left, never said a word, just carried on like nothing happened. I remember hearing their whispered fights late at night, the sound of my dad leaving and my mom crying. But the next morning, breakfast was on the table, and life went on. That messed me up. I told myself I'd never be like him, and I'd never let someone treat me like that. But deep down, I wanted stability. I wanted someone who'd make me feel safe, like I wasn't just waiting for the next betrayal. Then I met Audrey. She was everything. You know how in movies, there's always that one girl who walks into a room and suddenly everything slows down? That was her. Blonde hair, perfect smile, the kind of confidence that made you forget what you were even saying. But the crazy part? She was into me. We met at a friend's house party. I was nursing a cheap beer in the corner when she walked straight up to me and said, "You look like you don't belong here." I laughed. That obvious? She tilted her head, studying me. "You're not the type to party, just a party. You're watching people, figuring them out." That caught me off guard. She was right. I always watched people, always tried to figure out their angles. Maybe because I knew too well that people weren't always what they seemed. That night, we talked for hours. She was smart, driven, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world. By the time we left, she was holding my hand. And just like that, I was all in. Audrey and I were inseparable after that night. It wasn't one of those slow-burn relationships where you spend weeks wondering if the other person likes you. No, this was fast, intense, and all-consuming. We texted constantly. She'd send me little inside jokes throughout the day, voice notes of her laughing at something stupid, pictures of her coffee cups with messages like, "Fueling up to see you later." It was like she wanted me to know that I was on her mind, and damn, that felt good. Our dates weren't anything fancy. Neither of us had much money. We'd go for late-night walks through the city, sit in diners drinking terrible coffee, or stay up talking until one of us passed out mid-sentence. And when we were together, it was like she saw me, like really saw me. She'd call out things about me that no one else noticed. "You act like you don't care what people think, but you do," she said one night while we were lying on my tiny apartment floor listening to some old rock album. I smirked. "Oh yeah? What makes you say that?" She rolled onto her side, propping herself up on one elbow. "Because you pay attention to people. You read them. That's not something someone does unless they care." I didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't wrong. I wasn't used to feeling this way. I had spent years keeping people at arm's length, but Audrey? She made me want to let my guard down. And for the first time in my life, I actually thought that maybe, just maybe, I had found someone I could trust. For the first year, everything was perfect. The kind of perfect that makes you ignore little things you should notice. Audrey had this way of making me feel like I was the only guy in the room until I wasn't. It started small. One night, we were at a bar with some of her work friends. She was talking to some guy. Tall, built, looked like he spent half his life at the gym. I didn't think much of it at first. Audrey was friendly, and I wasn't the jealous type. But then I noticed the way she touched his arm when she laughed. The way he leaned in just a little too close. When she finally came back to me, I tried to brush it off. "Who's that?" She waved a hand. "Oh, just Mark from the office. He's harmless." Harmless. Right. I wanted to believe her. And maybe it was harmless. But something about it sat wrong with me. Then, there were the little lies. She'd say she was working late, but her phone would be off. She'd go out with her girlfriends and come back smelling like men's cologne. When I asked about it, she always had an answer. "You don't trust me," she said one night, arms crossed. That's your issue, not mine. That shut me up. Because deep down I knew my trust issues ran deep. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who accused his girlfriend of things just because of his own baggage. So I swallowed it. I convinced myself I was overthinking things. Until the night I couldn't ignore it anymore, that I remembered the exact moment my world cracked open. Audrey had been acting weird for weeks, distant, guarded, always checking her phone with a quick flick of her eyes before tucking it away, like she didn't want me to see. I kept telling myself it was in my head, that I was just being paranoid. Then came that night. She was supposed to be at a work event. I wasn't even questioning it anymore. But around midnight, my friend Jason called me. "Dude, where's Audrey?" he asked. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "She's at some work thing." A long pause. Then Jason sighed. "You know she's not. I just saw her at Harbor Lounge. With some guy." My stomach dropped. "What guy?" "Tall. Really tall. Basketball player build." They looked close, man. I felt my heart start to hammer, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "You sure it was her?" Jason didn't hesitate. 100%. I don't even remember driving there. One second I was in my apartment. The next I was pushing through the crowded bar, my hands clenched into fists, my pulse pounding in my ears. And then I saw them. Audrey was sitting in a dimly lit booth, her hand resting on some guy's forearm. He had to be at least 6 feet 10 inches, built like a pro athlete, and he was leaning in close, whispering something in her ear. She laughed. That soft, breathy laugh she used to save just for me. I just stood there, frozen, like my body had shut down. Then, as if she felt me watching, she turned her head. Our eyes locked. For a split second, her face went blank. Then, just as quickly, she recovered, plastering on a smile like she could somehow smooth this over. She slid out of the booth and walked toward me, her expression carefully controlled. "Ethan," she said like she was surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" My voice came out sharp. "I should be asking you that." She glanced back at the guy, who was watching us with an amused expression, like he knew exactly what was going on. Like he knew he had already won. Audrey turned back to me, lowering her voice. "Can we not do this here?" That was all it took. Those 6 words, so casual, so dismissive, like I was some inconvenience ruining her night. I felt something in me snap. I turned on my heel and walked out. And she didn't follow me. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my dark apartment, staring at the wall, replaying everything over and over. The way she looked at me. The way she didn't even try to explain. The way he smirked like he had nothing to worry about. By morning, my phone finally buzzed. "Audrey. Audrey, can we talk?" I ignored it. A few minutes later, another message. "Audrey, Ethan, please." I don't know why I agreed. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I wanted her to say something, anything, that would make it make sense. She showed up at my place an hour later, looking unbothered. Not guilty. Not remorseful. Just annoyed, like this was something I was making harder than it needed to be. The second she stepped inside, she sighed. "Ethan, you can't just storm off like that." I stared at her. "That's what you want to start with." She crossed her arms, shifting her weight onto one foot. "Look, I know how it looked, but..." I cut her off. "You were out with another guy. Late at night. Laughing. Touching him. What part of that doesn't look bad?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Ethan. It wasn't like that." I clenched my jaw. "Then, explain it." She let out another sigh, like she was so exhausted by all of this. "His name is Brad. He plays basketball for my friend's brother's team. He's just a friend." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous I couldn't believe she thought I'd buy it. "Just a friend," I repeated. "Audrey, I saw the way you were looking at him. I saw the way he was looking at you." She threw up her hands. "You're being insecure." That hit me harder than I expected. "Insecure," I repeated slowly. "No. I'm reacting to the fact that my girlfriend was on what looked like a date with another man. Her expression shifted just a little. Not guilt, frustration. Like I was the problem here. Okay, she said, suddenly softening her tone. I'm sorry you feel that way. I shook my head. That's not an apology, Audrey. She reached for my hand, her voice turning gentle. Ethan, you have to trust me. Nothing happened. I would never do that to you. And for a moment I wanted to believe her. But I couldn't ignore the fact that she still hadn't explained why she was with him in the first place. I pulled my hand away. Just answer one thing. If I hadn't shown up last night, would you have told me? A pause. Just half a second. But that half second told me everything. She forced a smile. Of course. I knew she was lying. And I knew that somehow, despite everything, I was still going to let her stay. Did I wish I could say I walked away? That I saw through her lies and ended it right there. But I didn't. Instead, I let her stay. I let her wrap her arms around me, let her kiss me, let her tell me that I was overreacting, and that Brad didn't mean anything. I wanted so badly to believe her, to believe that I wasn't that guy, the jealous, insecure boyfriend who sees things that aren't there. For a while, I convinced myself I was overthinking it. She started texting me more when she was out, sending selfies with her friends, checking in. It was like she knew she had to smooth things over, and I let her. Then, 2 weeks later, Jason called me again. I knew, the second I saw his name pop up, that it was bad. Ethan, he said, his voice hesitant. Man, I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but Audrey's at the Monroe. I frowned. Okay? She said she was out with friends. Jason exhaled. Yeah, well, she's here. And so is Brad. It felt like my stomach had been yanked out of my body. Are you sure? I forced out. Man, I'm looking right at them. A pause. And they just left together. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember grabbing my keys. All I remember is rage. By the time I pulled up to her apartment, I was shaking. I banged on her door, my pulse pounding in my ears. She opened it looking startled. Hair messy. Makeup smudged. Wearing a sweatshirt that wasn't mine. My heart stopped. I pushed past her, storming inside. Where is he? What? She looked genuinely offended, like I was the crazy one. Ethan, what are you doing? I spun to face her. Where is Brad? She scoffed. You're insane. He's not here. I looked around, eyes scanning the apartment. No sign of him. No shoes by the door. But then movement. My eyes snapped to the bedroom door. Before I could react, Brad stepped out, pulling his hoodie over his head like he had all the time in the world. My blood ran ice cold. He didn't even look surprised to see me. Just smirked, glancing at Audrey like this was some kind of joke. Yo, this your man? Brad said, his voice deep, amused. I could barely breathe. My hands curled into fists. Audrey stepped between us. Ethan, calm down. I looked at her, feeling something inside me shatter. How long? My voice was barely above a whisper. She swallowed. Ethan, how long? She dropped her gaze. A few months. My stomach lurched. A few months. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some one-time thing. She had been lying to my face, sleeping next to me every night while she was with him. I turned back to Brad, who just shrugged. Hey, man. She came to me. That was it. That was all it took. I lunged that I don't even remember thinking. I just swung. My fist connected with Brad's jaw. And for a second, he actually stumbled. For a guy that big, I expected him to barely flinch, but I must have caught him off guard. Then he laughed. That smug, mocking laugh like I was some kind of joke to him. Next thing I knew, I was slammed into the wall. My head snapped back, and pain shot through my shoulder. Brad had me pinned, one massive hand gripping my shirt, his other cocked back, ready to knock me out. Audrey screamed, Brad, stop. And just like that, he let go. I staggered, gasping for breath. But Brad just adjusted his hoodie like nothing happened. Like he was bored. You good, bro, he said, smirking. I wanted to kill him. Audrey shoved him back. Get out, she snapped. Now. He rolled his eyes, but didn't argue. He shot me one last look, like he knew he had won, before grabbing his bag and walking out the door. Then it was just us. Silence. Audrey stood there, breathing hard, looking at me like I was the one who had just betrayed her. I wiped my mouth, wincing. A few months. My voice was hoarse. She didn't answer. I nodded, laughing bitterly. Wow. And here I was feeling guilty about not trusting you. She ran a hand through her hair. Ethan? I didn't mean for it to happen. I clenched my jaw. Oh, that's great, Audrey. That makes so much difference. She took a step closer, voice softening. I still love you. That nearly broke me. I stared at her, feeling something inside me snap. You love me? I repeated, my voice shaking. You've been screwing him behind my back for months, but you love me? Tears welled in her eyes. I made a mistake. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. A mistake is one night. A mistake is coming clean. What you did, that was a choice. Her lip trembled. I don't want to lose you. I should have walked away right then. I should have slammed that door and never looked back. But I didn't. Because somehow, despite everything, I still wasn't ready to let her go. I should have walked away. Everything in me was screaming to leave, to end it right there, to turn my back on Audrey and never look at her again. But I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, breathing hard, staring at her like I didn't even recognize her anymore. The woman I had fallen for, the woman I had built my life around, was standing in front of me, eyes glossy with fake regret, wearing the same clothes she had probably stripped off for him just hours before. And yet I didn't leave. I wish I could tell you why. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was that twisted, desperate part of me that needed to believe she still loved me. I sat down on the couch, my whole body trembling. Audrey hesitated before kneeling in front of me, her hands reaching for mine. I pulled away. She flinched. Ethan? I shook my head. Just tell me why. She swallowed, looking down. I don't know. I let out a bitter laugh. That's not an answer, Audrey. Her fingers twisted together. I guess. I felt like something was missing. I stiffened. Missing? She looked up, tears slipping down her face. It's not that I don't love you. I do. But things got comfortable. Routine. And then Brad, he made me feel wanted. I clenched my fists. So I didn't? She shook her head frantically. No. It wasn't like that. You do make me feel wanted, but with him it was different. Different. Like that was supposed to make it better. I exhaled sharply. So let me get this straight. You got bored, and instead of talking to me, your boyfriend, you started sleeping with a 6 feet 10 inches basketball player? Audrey winced. I didn't plan for it to happen. That was the part that made me the angriest. The way she kept acting like she had tripped and fallen into his bed. Like this was some kind of accident, not a months-long affair where she lied to my face every single day. I leaned forward, my voice low. Did you ever feel guilty? Her breath hitched. I stared at her. When you came home to me after being with him? When you kissed me? Slept next to me? Said you loved me? Did you ever once feel like a terrible person? Audrey wiped her eyes. Yes. I shook my head. Doesn't seem like it. She grabbed my hand, holding it tight even when I tried to pull away. Ethan, I swear I'll do anything to fix this. I love you. I want you. Not him. I should have laughed in her face. I should have told her to go to hell. But instead I just sat there, feeling like my body didn't belong to me anymore. Her voice softened. We can get past this. Please. I'll do whatever it takes. I looked at her, seeing the desperation in her eyes. The pleading. The fear. She was scared not of losing me, but of losing the life she had with me. The stability. The security. The comfort. And despite knowing that, despite seeing her for what she truly was, I caved. I swallowed hard. This can never happen again. Audrey's breath hitched. It won't. I swear, Ethan, I swear on everything. I clenched my jaw. "If I even think you're lying to me, we're done?" She nodded furiously. "I promise." I sat back, rubbing a hand over my face. I felt like I had just made a deal with the devil. Because deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something so much worse. Forgiving her was the worst thing I ever did. At first it felt like we were fixing things. Audrey was suddenly the perfect girlfriend, always checking in, showering me with attention, making sure I knew exactly where she was at all times. She'd send me random texts, "At work," "Thinking of you," "Love you." She'd call me after girls' nights, just to tell me she was coming straight home. For a while I let myself believe that maybe she meant it, that maybe she really was sorry, and this was her way of proving it. We moved forward. I let her back in. And when she started talking about marriage, I pushed down every instinct screaming at me to run and told myself that she had changed. So I married her. And for a while, things were okay. We had kids, bought a house. Audrey started a career in real estate and took off fast. She had this way with people, this charm that could convince anyone to trust her. At first, I was proud of her. She was closing huge deals, getting bigger and better clients. But with success came distance. She started coming home later, started dressing up more. Heels, tight dresses, outfits she never used to wear for work. Started taking calls in the other room, lowering her voice when I walked by. The paranoia came creeping back, but every time I questioned her, she'd get defensive. "You're still bringing that up," she snapped one night after I asked why she was always on her phone. "Jesus, Ethan. It's been years." Yeah, it had been years. But the problem was, I had never forgotten. Because the truth was, I had never fully trusted her again. I had buried it, forced myself to pretend we were happy. But deep down I knew, that if she had done it once, she could do it again. And then one night, I found proof that it was late. Audrey was in the shower, and her phone was on the nightstand. I never wanted to be that guy, the one who checked his wife's phone like some kind of jealous, insecure mess. But something told me to look. So I did. And there it was. A text from David. "David, I can't stop thinking about you today." My stomach dropped. My hands felt numb. I scrolled up. The messages weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The way they talked, the inside jokes, the little flirtations, the way he spoke to her, it was obvious. This wasn't just some casual colleague. This was something. I heard the shower shut off. My heart pounded as I put her phone back exactly where it was, my fingers trembling. She walked out of the bathroom a few minutes later, towel wrapped around her body, smiling at me like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't lying to me all over again. I should have confronted her right then. Should have screamed, thrown her phone at the wall, demanded answers. But I didn't. Because this time I wasn't just going to react. This time, I was going to make her pay. The old me, the me from years ago, would have confronted Audrey that night. I would have exploded, demanded answers, let my emotions take over. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I had learned. Audrey had taught me. So instead of saying a word, I smiled back at her. I kissed her cheek. I tucked my suspicions away, locked them up tight, and started planning. If she was going to betray me again, she wasn't going to get away with it this time. But I needed more than just a few flirty texts. I needed proof, real proof. The kind that she couldn't weasel her way out of. So, I waited. I watched. And I started laying the groundwork. A few days later, I told Audrey I was thinking about getting better security for our family. "Hackers are everywhere," I said casually over breakfast. "I read this article about people getting their info stolen. I think I'm going to install some monitoring software on all our devices, just in case." She barely looked up from her coffee. Sounds smart." She had no idea I was lying through my teeth. That afternoon, I installed monitoring software on our home computer and synced it to her phone. Everything she searched, every text she sent, every location she visited, I saw it all. And sure enough, within days, David's name started showing up more and more. Catching her texting was one thing, But I needed more. I needed to hear them. So, I got a small voice recorder and slipped it under the passenger seat of her car. I told myself I'd give it a week. Just enough time to see if this was really happening. But I didn't need a week. 2 days later, I pulled the recorder from her car, plugged in my headphones, and listened. And there it was. Her voice. Soft, teasing. His voice. Low, laughing. I clenched my fists as I heard her say, "I miss you," in that same tone she used to use with me. I nearly crushed the recorder in my hands when I heard him say, "Can't wait to see you again." I had all the proof I needed. But exposing her right then? That would have been too easy. Audrey had built a life where she was untouchable. She had a successful career, a perfect family, a spotless reputation. So, if she wanted to play dirty, I was going to drag her down slowly, painfully. I was going to make her watch everything she loved fall apart. And the best part? She wouldn't even see it coming now that I had proof. I could have ended it right there. I could have thrown the evidence in her face, called a lawyer, and burned everything to the ground. But that would have been too easy. Audrey needed to feel this. She needed to watch her perfect little world crumble piece by piece, just like she had made me feel years ago when she stood in front of me, lying to my face. So I started small. Our daughter, Lily, had a school concert coming up, one she had been so excited about. Audrey had promised her she wouldn't miss it, but I knew her schedule. I knew she had been meeting clients late in the evenings, and I knew David was part of those meetings. So I did a little tweaking. I logged into the school's online portal, where all event reminders were listed, and changed the date on Audrey's calendar. I made sure her phone showed the concert happening a day later than it actually was. The night of the concert, Lily was dressed in her little outfit, practically bouncing with excitement. I was there front row, recording every second. Audrey? Nowhere to be found. Lily kept glancing at the door, waiting, her smile fading little by little. And when the concert ended, her eyes were glossy, with unshed tears. "Mommy said she'd be here," she whispered, voice small. I clenched my jaw. "I know, sweetheart." I took her out for ice cream afterward, making sure to casually snap a picture of her, still in her concert outfit, looking just sad enough. Then I sent it to Audrey. "Me. She did great tonight. Too bad you missed it." She called me immediately. I ignored it. Then came the text. "Audrey, what? I thought it was tomorrow." "Audrey, Ethan, I swear I didn't know." "Audrey, tell Lily I'm so sorry. Please, baby, I messed up." I let her panic for a full hour before I finally answered. "Ethan," she breathed, sounding frantic. "I swear, I had the date wrong." I kept my voice calm. "Yeah, you did." She let out a shaky breath. "Is Lily mad at me?" I glanced over at our daughter, who was quietly eating her ice cream, still looking disappointed. "She's hurt," I said. "She thinks you didn't care enough to show up." Audrey made a choke sound. "I do care." "Then maybe you should have paid more attention," I said, letting the words sting just a little. "Instead of being so busy with work." Silence. She knew what I meant. I didn't have to say it. That was just the first blow. The next one? That had to be public. I knew Audrey and David met at a small upscale restaurant every couple of weeks. I had dates, times, everything logged from her messages. So I made sure her father, Richard, was there too. Richard adored Audrey. He thought she was the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect mother. If there was one person whose disappointment would cut her deep, it was him. A few days before, I called him up. "Hey, I want to take you out for dinner," I said. "Just a father-son thing. There's a great spot I think you'll like." He agreed without hesitation. The night of the dinner, I made sure we arrived early. I positioned us at a table near the entrance, giving us the perfect view of the room. And then we waited. 10 minutes in, Audrey walked in. With him. She was smiling, laughing, looking so at ease. David had a hand on the small of her back, leading her toward a table. Richard went still. He frowned. "Is that Audrey?" I took a slow sip of my drink. "Sure is." His eyes narrowed. "Who's that man with her?" I set my glass down and leaned in. That Richard is David. The guy your daughter's been sleeping with. I had never seen a grown man go pale so fast. Richard turned to me, eyes wide. Are you sure? I pulled out my phone, scrolled to one of the many saved recordings, and pressed play. Audrey's voice, clear as day. I miss you. David's response, can't wait to see you again. Richard's hands curled into fists. I sat back, watching the realization settle in. The perfect daughter, the golden child, was nothing more than a liar. A cheater. Without another word, Richard stood up. I didn't stop him. I just watched as he stormed across the restaurant, straight toward Audrey's table. She was mid-sentence when she looked up and saw him. Her whole body froze. Dad, she said, her voice small. Richard glared at David, then at Audrey. What the hell is this? Audrey's face went ghost white. She stammered, looking between the two of us, like a trapped animal. It's not what it looks like. Richard turned to David. You screwing my daughter? David, to his credit, didn't try to lie. He just raised an eyebrow. Not really your business, man. That was a mistake. Richard snapped. Right there, in front of half the restaurant, he grabbed David by the collar and yanked him up. Plates clattered. People gasped. Audrey jumped up. Dad, stop. Richard roared in his face. You've got 5 seconds to get the hell out before I break your teeth. David threw his hands up. All right, man. Chill. He stepped back, adjusting his collar, but I caught the smirk he shot Audrey before walking away. Like she was still his. Richard turned back to his daughter, disgust written all over his face. You make me sick, Audrey. Her lip trembled. Dad, please, But he was already shaking his head. He looked at me, his jaw tight. I'm sorry, Ethan. I had no idea. I gave him a small nod, keeping my face neutral. Now you do. Audrey turned to me, her eyes wild with panic. Ethan? I stood up, smoothed out my shirt. Then, right there, in front of everyone, I looked her dead in the eyes and said, We're done. And then I walked out, leaving her standing there, broken, with the weight of her own choices crashing down around her. And I wasn't finished yet. Audrey didn't come home that night. I didn't expect her to. After Richard and I left the restaurant, I went straight home, poured myself a drink, and waited. Not for her. No, I was done waiting for Audrey. I was waiting for the next move. And sure enough, around midnight, my phone buzzed. Audrey, Ethan, please just talk to me. I stared at the message, feeling nothing. No anger. No sadness. No regret. Just satisfaction. I let her sweat for a few minutes before replying. Me about what? You got caught. There's nothing left to say. Seconds later, my phone started ringing. I let it go to voicemail. Then came another text. Audrey, I messed up, okay? I know that. But please, Ethan, we have a family. Don't throw everything away over a mistake. I laughed bitterly. A mistake. A few months with Brad. A secret relationship with David. Lies. Deception. And she had the nerve to call it a mistake? I took another sip of my drink, letting the silence stretch. Then, finally, I texted back. Me. I'll be filing for divorce in the morning. It was the truth. I had already spoken to a lawyer earlier that day. Everything was in motion. A long pause. Then, Audrey, no. That was it. Just one word. I shook my head. She still thought she had control. That she could talk her way out of this, the way she always did. But I wasn't giving her that chance. I turned off my phone, set it on the nightstand, and went to bed. And for the first time in years, I slept like a baby the next morning. I dropped the kids off at school and headed straight to my lawyer's office. By noon, the divorce papers were in motion. I made sure to request primary custody of our children, citing Audrey's questionable moral character and frequent unexplained absences. My lawyer assured me that, with the evidence I had gathered, I had a very strong case. By the afternoon, Audrey had finally stopped calling and started showing up. I heard the knock at the door and knew it was her before I even opened it. Sure enough, there she was, mascara smudged, hair messy, wearing the same clothes from last night. She looked like a wreck. For a second, a tiny part of me felt bad. Then I remembered the years of lies. The nights she came home late, smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. The look on Lily's face when she realized her mom hadn't shown up for her concert. I hardened my expression. "What do you want?" Audrey stepped inside, without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." I sighed. "Audrey, there's nothing left to say. It's over." Her eyes flashed. "No, it's not." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "So what, you're just going to pretend none of this happened? That I didn't catch you sneaking around with David?" She swallowed, looking away. I wasn't sneaking around." I laughed. "Right. You just accidentally fell into a secret emotional affair. Just like you accidentally cheated on me with Brad." Her face twisted. "Ethan, I told you." "No," I cut her off. "I don't care what you told me. I care about what you did." She reached for my arm. "Please, I'll do anything to fix this." I pulled away. "You said that last time. Look how that turned out." She blinked rapidly, breathing unsteady. I can change." I shook my head. "No, Audrey. I'm changing. I'm done with you." Her breath hitched. "What about the kids?" That's when I saw it. The panic, not because she was losing me, but because she realized she was losing the life she had built. I gave her a cold smile. "Oh, don't worry. I'll be keeping them." Her mouth fell open. "You can't do that." I shrugged. "Actually, I can. And with everything I've gathered, it'll be very easy to prove you're an unfit mother." She paled. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign the divorce papers. You're going to agree to the custody arrangement. And if you fight me on this, I'll make sure every single one of your clients' colleagues and friends knows exactly who you are." Audrey trembled. "You wouldn't." I leaned in. "Try me." Silence. Then, for the first time since this all started, Audrey broke down. She crumpled to the floor, sobbing, shaking, mumbling, I'm sorry," over and over again. And for the first time in our entire relationship, I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for her. Because this time, I was the one holding all the power. And I wasn't letting her slip away from the consequences. Audrey stayed on the floor, crying, but I just stood there unmoved. "I don't want to lose everything," she whispered. I exhaled sharply. "You already did." She looked up at me, eyes desperate. "Please, Ethan, we can fix this. For the kids." I shook my head. "No, I will fix this. By making sure they grow up knowing what honesty looks like." Her face crumpled. She knew she had lost. I walked to the front door and opened it. "You should go." She stared at me for a long moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, she slowly got up and walked past me. Right before stepping outside, she turned, one last attempt. "I never stopped loving you." I met her eyes, my expression unreadable. I wished that meant something. Then I closed the door. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Audrey didn't give up easily. For the next few days, she sent long messages, called nonstop, even showed up unannounced. Each time, I ignored her. Each time, she got more desperate. Then one evening, I got a message from her father. "Richard." She signed the papers. I stared at the text, letting it sink in. It was over. I had won. That night, I sat on the couch, staring at the divorce papers in my hands. Not sad. Not angry. Just relieved. Audrey had built her life on lies. And now, she had to live in the ruins of it. And me? For the first time in a long time, I could finally start over. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. Audrey barely fought it. Oh, she tried at first, begging, making empty promises, even threatening to drag it out. But she knew she had no ground to stand on. The evidence, the lies, the public humiliation, it was too much. Her father had turned cold toward her. Her career took a hit. And worst of all, our kids started seeing her differently. That part? That was what finally broke her. Lily didn't run into her arms when she came to pick them up for visits. My son, Jake, barely spoke to her when they went out. She had always been the perfect mom in their eyes, and now they were old enough to sense something had changed. One night after she dropped them back off, she lingered at the door. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms. "About what?" Her eyes were glossy. "Do you hate me?" I let the question hang in the air. Did I? I thought back to every time I had given her my trust, only for her to throw it away. The late nights. The lies. The way she had begged me not to leave her after Brad, only to turn around and do it again with David. I exhaled. "No." She swallowed. "Then do you think we could ever?" "No." She flinched. "You didn't even let me finish." I met her eyes, unwavering. "Because it doesn't matter how you finish that sentence." Tears spilled over, but I didn't feel bad. "Not anymore." She wiped her face quickly. "I miss you." I nodded. "I'm sure you do." For a long time, neither of us spoke. She just stood there, breaking, and I stood there, whole. "Finally," she whispered, "I wish I could take it all back." I tilted my head. "Do you? Or do you just wish you hadn't gotten caught?" Her lip trembled, and I knew the answer before she said anything. I stepped back and gestured to the driveway. "You should go." She hesitated, like she wanted to say something else, but then she nodded. As she turned and walked away, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt free. And as I closed the door behind her for the last time, I knew this was the best decision I had ever made.